Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation for allowing me to do this presentation. And I want to thank everybody who's watching the presentation. It's truly an honor to be allowed to participate on the World Congress number 16. Okay. Today we're going to talk about the personal fable and how it affects how it's going to relate to critical incident management. So I will begin by describing to you what a personal fable is and then how it will actually relate to debriefing and critical incident stress management. But before we do that, I'd like to do a quick introduction. My name is Pedro Soto. I go by Pete, so Pete Soto. I have a PhD in psychology, which has helped me tremendously understand and help talking to first responders during critical incident stress management. My whole life I spent usually dedicated to public service. So after high school, I joined the U.S. Army and did 3 years with the Army. I got out of the Army, came back home, and I joined the Fort Myers Police Department here in Southwest Florida, which is the west coast of Florida. Uh, After that, I decided to retire early from law enforcement and begin a career as a firefighter and as a paramedic. So I went to fire medic school and I did that for 16 years. And while I was doing that, I remained in law enforcement as a part-time deputy with the local sheriff office, mostly because, I enjoyed it and I didn't want to lose my certification. So I have experience in law enforcement and firefighting. And after I recently retired, about a year and a half ago, but I continue to work with a local critical incident stress management. We cover like 3 counties and pretty much anybody who needs us. It's a great experience. Okay, so let's start talking about the personal fable. In other words, what is the personal fable? Okay, according to researchers, during a lifespan from birth to basically to we die, researchers discover that as we approach the early teenage years, we develop something that they call egocentrism. Now, egocentrism is composed of two different subcategories. One is called the personal fable, which I'm going to be talking about, and the next one is called the imaginary audience. The imaginary audience is the belief that everybody's constantly watching you. That's right. When you're young, you light up smoking and you roll it up on your sleeve and you think everybody's looking at you. That's why you want to act really cool. It's called imaginary, but because of social media, new research has shown that Facebook or Instagram, whatever, that imaginary audience might not be so imaginary now, because if especially if you have teenager kids, you know how they are. They're constantly taking photos, chatting, and they can tell you exactly how many people are watching them. Okay, so it might not be imaginary anymore. The second part, which is the topic of our subject here, is called the personal fable. And that is the belief we get, especially as young adults, that, teenagers, that nothing bad's going to happen to us. Bad stuff only happens to other people. You get the feeling that nobody understands your problems, that you're invincible, that you're invulnerable, and basically you begin to take risks because of that belief. To give you an example, let's take a young person who begins to smoke. Now, everybody knows that smoking is bad. Secondhand smoke is bad. It basically can give you cancer. But these individuals, when we're young, we don't think like that. We think that, number one, I'm going to smoke because it looks cool. Number two, I'm not going to get cancer, okay, because I'm invisible and invincible, not invisible. And if it happens, if I get cancer, I can beat it. Okay, so that's the attitude we get in the early adult teenage years. Now, There's plenty of public service announcement out there, but we tend to ignore them because remember, we actually believe that number one, we're not gonna get cancer. Number two, if we get cancer, we're gonna beat it. So when you see those commercials, we really don't pay attention to them because they technically don't apply to us. Okay. Now, further research that lifespan development researchers believe that egocentrism begins to wind down as we reach around 15 or 16 years of age. Newer research has shown that that is not the case. It keeps going pretty much until we are in the early young adulthood years, 21, 22 years old, and they believe that egocentrism begins again as we leave home and approach new environments. So in a way, that's a way for us to basically, make our stand, approach to a new environment, if you will. Okay. But when I did my dissertation, I decided to further explore this, and I found literature and I did a survey, etc., during my research that showed that yes, uh, the personal fable, especially the personal fable, continues past young adult years into adulthood. What was found out about that is basically the level of egocentrism. Okay, basically, when we're young adult, it's higher, and as we age and we gain experience, it begins to basically decline, especially our risk taking. Now, next, we're going to move on into basically risk taking in adults. So now, as we move on to explaining adult risk-taking behavior, okay? So it's basically called, when you begin to take risks, it's called risk-taking propensity, okay? Risk-taking propensity. And basically, it means when we decide to basically, engage in more risky behavior. Okay, in other words, it's a tendency we get in behavior that bears the chance whether we're going to lose or whether we're going to win. And that depends on how we take the behavior. So risk taking can be, subcategorized into two different aspects. The first one being proactive, meaning that I'm going to be taking a risk. Therefore, I'm going to prepare myself. So I'm going to have plan A, plan B, plan C. Okay, at times we don't know what the risk is, so that puts us into what we call reactive risk behavior. Reactive risk behavior is the tendency when we go and take a risk, but we're not fully prepared for it. We haven't taken any precautionary methods, okay? So what usually happens in law enforcement, first responders, not every scene is the same, so we tend to go, even though there's policy and guidelines that tells us, about when to take a risk and when not to. More in law enforcement, more in firefighting than when it comes to law enforcement. For example, in firefighting, we say we may risk a life to save a life. Okay, we're not going to risk anybody to save property or to save that which is already lost. Okay, well, that is different to when it comes to law enforcement, because many times, whether it's a domestic disturbance or whatever the call it is, we usually go in there and there's a high risk of getting injured, and we fully don't comprehend what it is, or we have our tools in the toolbox, if you will, but we really don't know what is going on right here. And now a lot of that depends on the environment, and on the culture of law enforcement and firefighting. Okay, and as I stated before, this risk-taking behavior that we have is higher when we're younger, and it begins to decline and change as we grow older. For example, if you just start on the job today, I'm looking at maybe putting some money in stocks or whatever. So what is the financial managers basically going to tell you? You're 22, 23, take high risk, okay? And if you grow older and you become, towards retirement age, then they're going to tell you, well, basically now you should change from high risk into, moderate risk or low risk. Okay, talking financially. And that is the behavior we have also seen where on risk taking, where it's the younger guy who's willing to go gung-ho, remember, into the scene, maybe not prepared, maybe not thinking about it. It may result in a critical incident stress. Okay. So next we're going to talk about more about risk-taking behavior, and especially the young people that we're hiring. I would like now to discuss the risk-taking propensity when it relates to training the police department. And this has been studied. If we take training on, let's say, for example, driving, why are we still getting involved in high-speed accidents? Well, two researchers in 2003 decided that they were going to analyze police driving and training. Remember, we tend to hire younger people, and younger people, as I stated before, may have a higher personal fable than older people. Okay, so now we hire these people, and what these researchers observed is that we train them. They gave them 40 hours of driving, high-speed driving, whatever, and after they left, they began, they observed a higher number of accidents, and they were thinking, well, if you're so trained on driving, emergency driving, why are you still getting involved in accidents? Well, what they found out is that driving training, or whatever training it is, remember, we always train to be the best at what we are. So now that gives us the extra confidence that nothing bad's going to happen to us because we just took a 40-hour training class on driving. So now your personal fable is being affected because now you're thinking, oh, I just became a professional driver. I can drive however we want. And we tend to be a little bit less careful when we drive. Okay. Once again, this affects more younger officers, firefighters, EMS people than the older ones who have been there for a while. Okay, so what happened was the researchers reviewed these accidents and noticed two things. Number one, they occurred at high speed. Okay, and number two, after the investigation was completed, the officers involved gave different excuses that were inconsistent with the accident investigation. So if the accident investigation says, hey, these people were, you were speeding, you failed to do this and that, they say, well, no. Or they ask, well, tell me what happened. Well, I was going to a call, or I was responding, and they'll tend to blame it on something else. They tend to say, well, it was the weather, or the sun was setting, a squirrel crossed the road, or, I remember what some people call the phantom driver. The phantom driver is that invisible car that cut you off or something that caused you to have an accident. Okay, so what we gather from this and other studies is that basically training, which we need, remember, we always train to be the best, which we need, actually increases the personal fable, especially in young people, saying, oh yeah, I can do this. I'm good. I'm NASCAR driver, whatever, as an example, where I'm the best shot there is, or whatever training it is, that enhances that personal fable. Next, I'm going to be talking about young first responders / healthcare workers that haven't been exposed to the cultures of whether it's firefighting or police, EMS, first responder, whatever capacity you're working at. Okay, now research has shown that basically older adults experience more intensely negative emotion than young adults. Okay, this may be once again due to factors such as burnout, okay, and the constant exposure to critical incident without being debriefed or approaching the proper resources. In a way, if you have been in law enforcement, for as an example, for a long period of time, you become a cynic. Okay, as you grow older and you experience what you see, you become a cynic. Okay, but negative emotions might affect you. Another reason is that many of these older officers, okay, have not experienced the CISM concept because they didn't have it. Okay, they didn't have it back then, or was not offered to them. For example, when I was a police officer, regardless of critical incident stress, I was never exposed to critical incident stress. I didn't even know what it was. All we were told, basically, it was posted on the bulletin board, go to employee assistance program, whatever. If you're feeling whatever, we can help you with something. They even give you signs and symptoms. As an example, another example is I was part of an officer involved shooting. I was a supervisor. The young kid who did the shooting, unfortunately, the person died. Uh, he was, I mean, he was really emotional about it. I mean, he's taken alive, and now he's got to go through the process of investigation, IA, whatever, which is highly stressful. So the advice he got from the chief of police was, "Oh, you'll be okay. Just drink a bottle of vodka, and you'll be fine." Okay, wrong advice. Okay, I first learned of critical incident stress management when I was older. After I left the police department, I joined the fire department. I went to a critical incident involving a child, and I was exposed to critical incident stress management for the very first time. So that's another reason why, as we are, us older officers may not deal properly with emotions or might suppress them because we never got the education that younger officers are getting now. Okay, and we'll talk about education later because I believe it should be done before that. We should prepare these young kids for what they may encounter instead of having them encounter it, then come to us. Okay. However, even though older officers, firefighter, EMS tend to experience more intensive negative emotions, research has shown that they recover more easily than younger adults from the effects of emotion. Okay, and that test came from showing certain emotional films to a group of young people and older people, and you can see that they saw that the older people recover a little bit earlier. Now, another portion of that is completely different subject is basically that some officers may consider themselves, especially the older officers, and also this might happen to soldiers coming back, is that they consider themselves damaged goods. Okay, they're no good no more. They low self-esteem. They're damaged good. Okay, so when it comes to young first responders, uh, of course, a lot of agencies hire younger people. Some agencies may have mandatory retirement by certain age. Therefore, as an example, is some of the federal government jobs in law enforcement, they cannot get hired after 37 because they have a younger, they got to retire. They have mandatory retirement. Okay, some of them do. Okay, so anyway, agency go out there and they recruit these young people from colleges. They recruit them, some of them might come straight from the military, and some of them may even come back from, straight from high school, and they join the police, fire, EMS force. Okay, so yeah, it's absolutely positive that many agencies just hire, career agencies hire young people. Okay, and as I stated before, these young first responders may lack the maturity and experience in response in comparison to older first responder. Basically, that has to do with the brain physiology, if you will. If drinking age is 19. Here in the state of Florida, you have to be 21 to be hired as a law enforcement officer carrying a gun patrolling, but you only have to be 19 or 18 to become a firefighter, EMT, or correctional officers who do not carry a gun in many of the jails here. And the reason for that is basically what is called a frontal lobe. Our frontal lobe is, if you will, what gives us the logic. Okay, so as you're young, that's another reason why you make you do stupid things, okay, because you're not fully, your frontal lobe is fully not developed at that time, okay. And it is believed that that frontal lobe will not fully develop until you're 21 or 22 years old, or even up to 25. So as we hire these young people with no experience, maybe they don't have any street experience either, then you know they're gonna lack that maturity and experience, but their personal fable is going to be a lot higher than the older adults. Now, if you're familiar with the law enforcement, firefighter, or EMS culture, or other first responder cultures, you got to understand we always train to be the best. We train to do the best. Most agencies train to be the best. Especially firefighters get to train a lot more than police officers because we don't have to go on patrol. You know, we don't have to do, we have time to train, and many times fire agencies schedule the training, and you schedule to, I'm sorry, you train to be the best, okay? Especially during the first years as a young police officer, firefighter, first responder, is what we call the romantic years, okay? From 3 years, 1 to 3 years, you know, romantic years, you think you're gonna go in there, solve all the crimes, put bad people in jail, you're gonna save everybody, you're gonna put every fire out, you're gonna, you know, save property, etc., etc. Okay, and that's the romantic years, because you do not understand yet. In law enforcement, it's going to be how the judicial system work, the internal politics and stress. In the fire department, is basically you don't realize that every fire is different, every accident is different. So we train to be the best. Okay, so what usually happens is being the best. Usually, first responder are alpha category people who want to take charge and control the scene. They completely tell you through ICM, another thing, you got to control the scene. But the mistakes that we make is that we think that we can control everything that happened prior to us being dispatched. So often when we get there, we do an outstanding job, and let's say unfortunately somebody passes away or somebody doesn't make it, then we take that personally, and we begin to feel as we are failures. Okay, I'm basically Superman. I'm gonna go in there, I'm gonna save everybody. Now you go to a car accident, especially a traumatic accident when it, let's say, involves all younger kids, especially children. Let's say, for example, that a child has lost their life in a car accident or something. You go in there, you extricate them, and basically you feel like, oh my God, I'm the best, I did everything, but I failed because, you know, these young kids or kids die and I couldn't save them. You know, even you do your best, you pull them out, you do all you've been training to do. They get to the hospital, and unfortunately, you know, they die. That's when we begin to see ourselves, especially younger people, as a failure. Okay, how can this be? Other than that, you go to a certain scene, and especially scenes with children, I'm using this as an example, tend to be chaotic. Let's take, for example, a drowning. Okay, unfortunately and sadly, we have too many drownings of kids here in Florida, because pretty much everybody has a pool. But you go to a scene like that, and it's chaotic. You may have mom and dad, grandfather, children around crying, asking what's going on. And while you're doing the job and trying to stay professional, you know, you might begin to feel these emotions that you basically wonder, why am I feeling these emotions? I'm Superman. I'm invulnerable. You know, you know, not only now I'm feeling like a failure, but I'm seeing this, you know, I'm feeling these emotions, and you don't know how to deal with them. As many of you know, part of the culture is basically that you don't show emotion. Because if you show any type of emotion, you're a wimp, you're weak, and we cannot have weak people here working with us. You need to be strong. You need to be, you know, as a stone, you know, strong. And you tend to suppress that. Okay. Not only do we tend to suppress those emotions at work, but we basically go over there at home and don't talk to the wife, don't talk to the kids, stop doing things. So it's beginning to affect us, and you probably don't understand why this is happening until you have a diffusing, especially into until you have a debriefing. Okay, and part of debriefing is we normalize, because when we train, and especially we have that personal fable up there that nothing bad's gonna happen to us, we are the best, whatever happens we can deal with it. And when that doesn't happen, of course that begins to affect us emotionally and psychologically. So in other words, we tend to forget that we're human. And when we do the debriefing, part of normalizing is basically, listen, you're human. Of course you're gonna feel this, okay? So is the culture out there that could be an obstacle to that? Part of the debriefing is basically explaining to them what happened, why you're feeling this way, how you can deal with it, and it's okay. It's okay to be human. It's okay to cry. And of course, but if it comes, it's okay to feel a little bit depression or anxiety. You might get triggered by certain other calls, but here's the resources. You are human. You're still the best, and we gotta get them to recognize that, yeah, you did your job 100%. However, you didn't cause that accident. You didn't cause that fire. You didn't cause that crime. You responded to it, and you did your best. You may have full control of the scene, but you cannot control something that's beyond your control. But however, you can control how you seek resources and how you act to certain emotions that you may feel, especially. A way I found out to do that is basically to explain to them what the personal fable is. Okay. When I explain to them, well, especially young kids, this is a personal fable. We train to do this, and I explain it to them. I did this with my daughter, trying to explain to her basically because she was asking me about it. At the time, she was still in high school, and I explained to her, well, you think nobody understands your problems. You think you're invulnerable. Nothing's going to happen to you. You think you're invincible. And if something bad happens to it, you're going to basically think that, you can handle it. And she just looked at me and said, oh, wow, man, are you reading my mind? Because, that's basically what happened. So basically, when I speak to these individuals, especially the young officers, first responders that come to a debriefing, I explain to them, listen, this is what happens to us, all of us here. You get a personal fable. Okay, maybe you have gotten some training, or maybe you have gotten, you feel like you're the best at it. Maybe, unfortunately, especially if you're police officers who unfortunately gets involved in a car wreck or maybe hurt, injure somebody, you sit there and wonder, well, I'm the best. I'm trained at this. How can this happen to me? Okay, so I find out that a lot of time it's better easy for them to understand why you're feeling this. Number one, the personal fable. You thought this would never happen to you. It can happen. It happened to all of us. And of course, what we do during debriefing is basically we have got to remind them that they're human and these feelings they're getting are completely natural. So as we come to the close of my presentation, we're gonna let us the conclusion basically summarize here. It's basically a first responder may find their emotions as a shock, especially when they're younger, when they experience especially their first traumatic incident. Because when you usually go to your first murder, your first death, your peers usually sitting there looking at you, how you react or something, and they might, hey, are you okay or whatever. It's more, as you can see, the firefighter culture is more tight, if you will, than the police, because, you got to spend 24 hours together every third day, etc., etc. So they're more gentle, if you will. The young people, of course, they will tend to suppress their feelings due to, like I stated before, our culture. One thing about our culture is, I remember that when we would have classes, often training, we get together. It's cool, but if you're having this education training for things that you think don't pertain to you. For example, if you're going to have somebody come in and talk about critical incident stress management, basically, if you bring somebody who's not part of the culture, uh, for example, a police officer, firefighter, whatever, it's got to be police on police, fire on fire. It depends on your relationship. So, but if you bring somebody what we call an outsider, they're not gonna pay attention. Number one, as I stated before, in comparing the smoking ants to the personal fable, you don't think it's going to apply to you because remember, you're not going to get cancer from cigarettes. And if you do, you're going to beat it. Okay. But it's the same thing. You're having, oh, what are we talking about this? What is this? And you make joke. You really don't, especially if it's from somebody from the outside. The attitude might be, oh, great, we have a college kid coming in here. What do you know about our jobs? You don't even have no clue. You sit at home and play video games, whatever. Especially nowadays with the constant criticism, especially for police officers that they get, what we call Monday morning quarterbacking, people who had got no experience. So I tend to see officers becoming more, more defensive about that. So, and I recall being in training where they bring somebody, maybe somebody from employee assistant program, but you're sitting there like, I don't want to be here. What does he or she know about us? You don't know anything. So, through my experience, I believe that training, especially critical incident stress management, should be done by a fellow peer. Now, if they don't have the education or if they do not have the resources, basically you got to bring somebody from the outside. It's good to have somebody, especially a higher rank officer present that can relate to the job and co-teach with this person. We're very blessed here in Southwest Florida that we have Chief John McMahon. He's been in the fire service for like 200 years, and that back when they used to put fire out with buckets, full of sand. And then we also have a licensed psychology who has a lot of experience dealing with law enforcement, critical incident stress. And together they have been doing critical incident for over 30 years, and they're highly respected. Okay, so when they can go there, especially the psychologist, and everybody respects her, etc. But you have to understand the culture before you talk to these people. Okay, like I stated before, may not know how to handle the emotions, especially how the impact of the personal fable may have on young first responders. I believe we need more resilient training at the police academy, fire academy. I taught at the police fire academy for like 20 years. We go by state curriculum. Back then, we only have like 2 paragraphs on critical incident stress management. Okay. Now the state of Florida has, especially for firefighters, you have to watch a lesson, mandatory PowerPoint on critical incident stress management. But when it comes to this, I believe that teaching live, you can connect emotionally and tell more stories rather than sitting in front of a computer and click, click, click. A lot of times you don't pay attention to it. You just click, 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 take the test, whatever. So part of that resilience training, I took the one offered by CISM, which I highly recommend. It was awesome. And so they may not know how to handle their emotions that they never encounter, how to handle that critical stress, incident stress. So it's better if they get some resilient training and they learn some stress management techniques and some coping techniques. Okay, and then basically what I do when I teach deep breathing, especially to first responder, I don't call it deep breathing exercises. Okay, I call it combat breathing. Now they're like, oh, combat breathing, that's cool. Yeah, I can deal with it. I'm not gonna sit there and do that. If you call it something else, they may not take it seriously. And of course, you're gonna have what we call distorted thinking. Okay, distorted thinking. Maybe you go to You know, maybe you've done CPR 100 times and you may not have saved somebody. You might not even know if the people made it. They start thinking when you use words like always and never. All this always happens to me. You know, I've never saved a life. I'm no good. And you start comparing yourself to especially fictional characters and fictional stories that you may see on TV that obviously have nothing to do with real life. Okay. So basically, what I think being, first responder myself is basically that the number one thing is basically is part of the debriefing is basically like I stated before, remind them that they're human. It's okay to cry. It's okay to feel a little bit depressed. It's okay to feel a little bit of anxious next time you may go to a similar call. And when you hear a call on that radio, you might feel a little anxious. Deep breathing exercises will help you that, etc., etc. You're a human, okay? And then teach a little bit more compassion. And I do that basically, like I stated, because it's taboo to feel sad or something in first responder culture. Some of them is really compassion. And I tell them, you have each other. Okay, you went through this together. You're a band of the hand. You suffered through this together, or I don't use the word suffer, but you know, have compassion. You're there for each other. Be there for each other, and then give them resources. What resources we have, and what I like also to tell them is the quality of life. Okay, the quality of life. You deserve for what you do a good quality of life. But if you're feeling depressed and it's beginning to interfere with your normal routine, if you will, you owe it to yourself to seek out help. A lot of things that they may have fear about is they think that if they're feeling depressed, they got to go and see a shrink and, they're going to be pulling light duty or something. So I remind them that, medical history is confidential here. You don't have to tell anybody. You don't have to see a shrink. Okay, you can call your primary doctor and say, hey, my toe hurts, and when you get in there, tell them, doc, I'm feeling a little bit depressed. That's a doctor to patient confidentiality. Remind them of that. Remind them of the process, because their thinking is that they're gonna go to see a psychologist or a therapist, and they're gonna be laying on the couch, like in the movies. So you got to make them understand you're not vulnerable to emotions. You're going to happen, and especially can happen to you. Now that it happened to you, maybe if you sought help, not only do you understand how the personal fable plays into it, so that way you can tell why these kids may be taking risks, unnecessary risks, whatever, but that way you can help them out. Okay, say, hey, go to this debriefing. It's going to help you out a lot. I'm here, or whatever you need. Okay, so this is going to conclude my presentation. I thank everybody once again for attending to ISIF, for allowing me to do this. And I'm gonna basically what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna open it up to take some questions. If you have any, just ask. So thank you very much.